YouTube, what's going on? Today we're going to talk about using CSS styling to manipulate elements of HTML code. So this is our example of a resume template that I coded out the last couple of days, and let's go through it. So if we start at the top here, we have my name, Mike Wagner. Pretty simple, just my name. We come in HTML, we have a general H1 tag, which means the header, and the 1 means it's the biggest size. You can go all the way down to H6, which is the smallest size. And when we look at this, there's like, it looks like kind of scribbles, like I drew it rather than just text itself. That's because we use CSS styling to change how it looks. Now, if we look here, first we have that H1 tag we just talked about. If we come down to CSS, we can see here's also H1. So this tag was called by just putting in a simply H1, and H2 means this next tag down here that we will come to eventually. But first we'll start with, we're just calling H1 right here. We open a bracket and we close a bracket. Inside those brackets, it's what's going to happen to that header tag. So what's going to happen to the text in it, what is going to be different about it than rather just regular text. So if we come here, we can see our font family, which is just the font style, pretty much. Just if you're in Word and you pick Times New Roman, that's your font family. So we have caveat and cursive. Now what this means is caveat is our font. Cursive is the way that it's written. So if we look, caveat is our general font to this. Now it might look, if we get rid of cursive here, sorry, I just had a brain lapse. Our caveat and cursive, they work together to make this look how it is. So our font family is caveat, and then we're picking a cursive version of it. So Mike Wagner, you can see it's kind of squiggly, a little like cursive, and it just matches our font. But we come to a font weight is 400. So that means that this line here is a little thicker than it would be if it was normal. So if we go to 100, you can see it updates. There, 900. 900 was a little more noticeable. But if we have, see 900, it's much thicker than if we were to make it 400. Just like that. So then we come to the next one. We have our H2 tag down here. Ooh, too far. Move up a little here. We have our H2 tag, which is this aspiring user experience designer. And of course, GMA supporter. Other than that, we go to the only difference that we find in this one is this class equals, and in double quotes, description. So that might be different than the first one, because the first one is just calling a tag. Now, why would we need this class description in here if we could just call H2? Well, the difference is if we have an H2 somewhere else in the HTML, then that means if we apply the rules to this, it goes to all of them. So if we want to change something for this aspiring user experience designer at GME Explorer, to all that, if we want to change something to that text specifically, just to that one or that one and one other H2, but not all of the H2s that are used, then we use this tag or this attribute that's called a class. And the class is just, this could be any name you want it to be. This is just used so that in CSS we're able to call it and we're able to pick, that's the one I want to alter. So if we come down here and we look for description, let's see it right here. We come here and we're like, wait a minute, this way of calling it's a little different than our H1 before. Before we were able to just write the tag name, H1, but we come down here to description and there's this period behind it. But why? The reason is because to call a class, you have to put a period next to it. If not, it's going to be, if we got rid of that period, it'll be looking for a description as a tag. It won't be looking for it as a class. So it's just how it looks for H2 that doesn't have a period before it. It would be looking for some kind of tag in this spot that says description, which isn't a thing in HTML. Now, what we wanted to look for is this class description. So by doing that, we put the period in, we put in the name of the class, and then our open and close brackets. Inside, we can put font size to 30 pixels. So that's just saying that the size of these words here are going to be 30 pixels, whereas we could change them to 10 pixels, and you'll see it makes it much smaller. So we put it to 30, and we just keep it at that because that just looked better of how it was. So then we come down, we can look at a very important use of CSS styling, which is the skills and abilities area. Now in here, we find this in the HTML, skills and abilities right here. This uses what's called a CSS grid. Now, a CSS grid is used to help format objects by styling them to a certain spot in the page. So just like if we had a table in Excel, you have 2 columns in something and then you have 5 rows. So you have a total of 10 total cell blocks and you have to fill them in however you can. Now with the CSS grid, we're able to set how many columns we want, how many rows we want, and then what we want to fill each column or each cell in the columns and rows in our table. So our first one here is the skills and abilities. That's the very top. We come to our class that we just learned about. That's grid item 0. And we look, all right, where's grid item 0 called? Right here. Right here we look, here's our attributes to grid item 0. That's everything that's applied to the skills and abilities text there. So we can look, first one is this grid area. Well, what's grid area now? Grid area with the name skills header. Skills header is just a made up thing I made. It just helps me identify it better because it's the header of the skills area. So by using that, we can come back to our grid. Now our entire grid is encased in this div tag with the class grid container skills. Simple enough. It's a container for the skills area and it's in the grid. It's in a grid. So that's our general name that I just made for it. I don't know, just made sense to me. So we call that class here and we're able to say, okay, we want to display this as a grid. That's so the computer knows that this is going to be a grid. We come down here, we come to grid template areas. Now this is a very key part of the grid here. Each one of these lines are represented as rows. And in each row, we could specify how many columns and what's going to take up each column. Now for that to make sense, we'll look at the top row. This is our top row that's highlighted here. Each line's a row. It looks at it, it's like, okay, first row, second row, third row, fourth row, fifth row. And when it comes to columns, it's a little different. This skills header and this skills header appears here twice. So as we saw before, skills header is the name of the grid area for our first item, which is the skills and abilities up top. Now that comes up twice because I determined that we needed 2 columns to represent all of the data. So here we have 1 column, here's another column. But these 2 areas are in the middle of both columns. Seems they take up both columns because they do. They span over both columns. This is our first column. This is saying this is the first column, and this is in the second column. Since they're both the same thing, it sticks it right in the middle. Just makes it easy for us, slaps it right in there. Now the difference is when we come to the second row, we see this is different, 2 different names. That means this stack title takes up the first column and design title takes up the second column, both in the same row, but takes up 2 different columns. So stack title relates to this full stack development area, and then design title over here relates to this design tools on the right side. Now, as we go through, we can look that the stack content relates to this list here. This design content over here links to this list on the right. Our modeling title, we come back to it's taking up both columns, and then we see it's positioned in the middle for us pretty nicely. And then modeling content does the same thing. This list is the modeling content, it's placed right in the middle. Now, each of these has different attributes that you can add to them. The general ones, which is still in our entire container for the grid, the most probably prevalent one in this grid is the justify content space evenly. Now, what that means is it justifies all the content in the grid so that there's even spacing on the sides and in the middle between columns. So this top row, there's modeling programs and the list, all take up both columns. So there's no spacing in the middle. That's why they're placed in the middle, so that there's even spacing on this side compared to this side. Now it becomes a little different when we look at these two in the middle. Since they take up two separate columns, there has to be even space in the middle as well as on the sides. So that's why they're pushed kind of inward a little bit, and there's an even space all around them. So if we were to make this bigger, we could see they do move. Oh, it's too much, just change the top, but they do move based on how big the screen gets. The gap between them gets bigger and smaller. Okay, then the padding on the bottom is just used to make this area a little bigger. If we were to get rid of that, we have padding 0, which was how it originally was. It seems too close to the next section down here. So I just added the little 20 pixels of padding and just made it look a little better. So that's my general intro to CSS and how it affects the HTML. There's other parts that are on this that can be looked at on my CodePen link that will be in the comments of the YouTube video, and how these columns are made skinnier than this side over here. How this text is much larger. It's kept in the same line as each other. This is another version of our CSS grid on the bottom, where these are justified to the right side. If you want to look more at that, you can look in the HTML and CSS coding over here. It's not too hard to understand. It's once you really get working with it, it makes a lot more sense. It's more of coding is a very hands-on type of activity. If you really want to learn it, you just have to try out everything. Look up things on any site, watch YouTube videos. I'll watch my YouTube video. Go for it. I'll take the view. But it's exciting once you get to actually understand what's happening, how things are changing, how you can manipulate things to make it look how you want. It's a lot more fun than I guess some people make it out to seem. Then lastly, if you wanted to go through the code, these links at the bottom, this is my personal email that went through the school. This is my Dev.to page, which is just simple blog posts. Sometimes I would put up these projects. And then it's my LinkedIn if you want to check out anything about me, and my YouTube, which you're already on. So like the video, subscribe it. Now I sound like a regular YouTuber. Wow, that was cheesy. All right, have a good day, everybody.